Stay tuned for tonight's adventure with the Fat Man.
Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because I'm really excited to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Touche, Pussycat. Yeah! All right, guys, have fun. Meet Mervyn Touche. And Mervyn Touche here has an incredible story to tell. And I found out about him because Sir Edmund Bewley casts him, this Mervyn Touche, as one of the original undertakers in County Tyrone, where William Poe eventually settles. But that's it. There's no other mention of Mervyn Touche or this Mervyn family here in the rest of this chapter or the Poe biography, right? This is it. But having learned my manners from the Dukes of Rutland, right, I had to Google him to see if there was any more to him than just him being an undertaker in the County Tyrone, right? And wouldn't you know it, right? It turns out that Mervyn Touche here is a pretty important guy in his own right in this false paradigm of reality we call home, right? And his story is a textured tapestry with interwoven layers that stretch as far back as the English occupation of Acre in the Holy Land during the Ninth Crusade, right? I mean, it just goes really deep, right? All the way to the present day, right? That's how deep Touche's story goes, right? I mean, his story is so deep, in fact, that it's been pitching me fits every time I've been trying to put this episode together, because I just keep getting lost in the details, right? And I'm losing focus for what this story really is. Right, because the story of Mervyn Touche is really a cautionary tale about the molding of perception into reality. Because perception is reality, right? But the problem with that, of course, is that perception can be manipulated. Like what's been happening this whole time with the pandemic and the virus and all of this, right? This is a great example of how perception can be weaponized, to drive a narrative or force a reality, right? But perceiving something doesn't make it so, right? And the story of Mervyn Touche is the story of creating a perception of reality, or at least a corner of that reality anyway, because Mervyn Touche just so happens to be a major cog in the machinery of how we perceive homosexuality today. And the way that perception around this issue has evolved and shaped our reality today, because Mervyn here just may be the highest profile victim of the Buggery Act of 1533, right? You gotta love that year, right? And it was the first civil anti-sodomy law on the books, because before this act of 1533, the crime of homosexuality was handled by the church. Sodomy, of course, being a crime against God, right? And being found guilty of buggery left one not only open for execution, as most people were executed for this crime, but all of your possessions would be forfeited to the church. You couldn't leave anything to your family, so all your money and land would be confiscated. And apparently this was pretty good business for the church, right? So good, in fact, that when Henry VIII told the Catholic Church to get lost, he and Parliament were pretty quick to get this act out there to take advantage of this lucrative revenue stream, right? It even provided a way for Henry and the Crown to go after priests and monks who were otherwise above civil law, having immunity for even the high crime of murder, right? That's unbelievable, right? And so this proved to be a valuable weapon for Henry and his new Church of England, to which, of course, he just happened to be the godhead, right? And by all appearances, it was used as such, right? Taking down certain priests and low-level political enemies, right? Fluffing the royal coffers, as it were, right? Until 1630, when our new friend Mervyn here was put on trial for raping his wife and sodomizing the help, right? He and two of his favorite servants were tried for these crimes in what I've been calling the trial of 4 centuries, right? Having the implication that this trial has in the modern era, right? And what really tipped me off to this was a quote from Mervyn that Wiki was kind enough to leave for me, and that quote is this: "News writers throughout England and as far away as Massachusetts Bay speculated about the outcome." And so when I first read that, I had to pause and think for a second, like, did they have newspapers in 1631? Right? And if they did, why would the people of Massachusetts Bay Colony be interested in this? I mean, surely they would have more pressing concerns like, survival, right? Dealing with the natives, the success of their colony, to worry about over the trial of some super rich member of the parliament who got caught buggering the help, right? I mean, but sure enough, they did have newspapers, right? And they were essentially broadsheets that had some pertinent information regarding the goings-on in whichever realm or kingdom, right, to be read in the court or town centers, right? And Wiki gives this as the earliest newspaper, as we know them today with multiple pages, from 1609. It was definitely for the elite, it wasn't for the common man or the serf. Right? And it's not lost on me that this is a Carolus or Carol production, this newspaper. Right? And down the line, I'm going to get more into detail about publishing, newspapers and magazines, because that's pretty much how this whole Poe Chronicles began, right? When I rabbit holed Edgar Allan Poe for the first time, I made some interesting connections to his family and the publishing industry out of England, and the way they used that industry to shape our world, right? And the trial of Mervyn Touche is an early, bright, shining example of the use of the press in shaping public opinion, because not only is this early form of newspaper used to turn this trial into a sensation, I mean, it really does play out as one of the earliest, not the first example of tabloid journalism, right? And I'm sure Touche's public and political standing had something to do with this as well, because the wealth and influence of Sir Mervyn Touche, the Lord Baron Audley, the Earl of Castlehaven, cannot be understated. It just can't. And so, the entire kingdom, extant as it was in 1631, was riveted. And who wouldn't be, really, right? I mean, who doesn't love a good old-fashioned sex scandal, right? And I think that's something that maybe Mud City has been missing all this time, right? So, even more important than how the trial was covered or its sensationalism is how the trial and how this sensationalism would be used going forward. Because it's notable in a few ways, right? As far as legal precedent goes, it was the first trial in which a wife could testify in court against her husband, right? And it also established ways around perjury, especially in the cases of Touche's servants who were tried after Mervyn Touche, who was found guilty based partly on the testimony of these servants in his trial. Right? So when it was time for their trials, they had no defense, right? Because their testimony had already condemned Mervyn Touche to death. And so this case is actually quite significant in the annals of law. Right? But also in how this case was used going forward. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of perception becoming reality. Because it's after this trial that we see a dedicated effort to shape the public opinion about the evils and punishment of homosexuality, right? And that's because every time there was a buggery trial going forward, they reprinted and put into circulation the story of Mervyn Touche. And that's what this is. This is the cover sheet of one of those pamphlets. Right? And it says that nearly all the public retellings and pamphlets in the following 100 years not only catered to the public interest in bawdy sensationalism, but were directly inspired by notorious cases of sodomy and are demonstrably linked to the public interest in sodomites, right? So, as I was saying, everybody loves a good sex scandal, right? And they purposefully generated the interest in this lifestyle by intimately connecting it to high nobility and selling that story for generations. And so right from the beginning, the case was exploited more for its commercial topicality than for its moral meaning. And so in a time when morality meant everything, what they did was they created a commercial market for this lifestyle to cash in on, because look at the way they just kept dropping the story of Mervyn Touche every so often. Every time there was a trial, 1643, 1679, 1699, 1698, 1708, right? 1710. They kept him in that story in the public eye. For what purpose? Why did they do that? If there kept being new cases, why keep revisiting that one? What were they hoping to achieve with that here, right? Because the true genius of this story is in the multiple meanings of touche, right? Which can mean to score a point. And they certainly use Mervyn Touche here to make their point, right? And it's not too subtle a one at that, right? Even nobility lose their heads. So by constantly reinforcing the immorality of it and by creating this perception of homosexuality as evil and punishable by death, it doesn't necessarily make it so, right? Because people love it, right? And because if there's anything our historical narrative teaches us, is that sexual depravity and homosexuality have been a part of the human experience since its very beginning. Right? It's in the Bible, right? Egyptian pharaohs and Roman emperors practiced it, right? The almighty Yaldabaoth is a hermaphrodite, for crying out loud, right? I mean, it's a part of us. But how big a part is the question? Who exactly are they warning with these pamphlets? Or could there be something else behind them? And this is where the perception as reality plays a bigger, yet more subtle role, because as we learned in the Pulaski principle, that only about 5% of the US population is gay, and so for the sake of this video, we're going to say that that's a constant. So like in 1630, 1730, 1830, what have you, 5% of the population is gay, right? So a smaller world population would then also severely limit the number of people who were gay, right? And so given the time period we're talking about here and the severe punishments for homosexuality, I think it's pretty safe to say that the small number of gay people, unless of course they were nobility, who just so happen to make up most, if not all, of that 5%, by the way, they would be sufficiently frightened of people finding out, right? And so what were they doing with these reprints? Every several years, putting it out there, reinforcing that, right? Were they fomenting hatred, distrust, fear, right? But they were certainly sensationalizing and creating an interest in this subject, right? And perhaps they were creating a false sense of just how prevalent such a malediction was in society. Right? I mean, how much reinforcement and repetition would these ideas need to take hold, and what could be done with that information? Because when I was first putting this together, I wanted to double check my 5% figure from the Pulaski video without actually having to go back and watch the video, right? And so I did a quick Google search, and it brought me to this bombshell of an article from Gallup, right? And it says that Americans still greatly overestimate the U.S. gay population, right? And this is from June 2019, because the estimate of the American people is not even close to what they tell us the real estimate is, right? And so if you're not familiar with Gallup, what Gallup is the American Institute of Public Opinion, right? And they've been giving us our public opinion out of Washington, D.C. since 1935, right? And, so any sort of public opinion poll and how directing public opinion, is done through this Gallup agency. They've been around forever, right? I'm sure you've heard of them. And so Gallup confirms an under 5% population for the American LGBT community, but it also shows that the American people believe that 23.6% of the population is gay, or roughly 1 in 4. That is incredible. Right? 1 in 4 people? And so think about that. At 4.5% of the U.S. population, that would be 14.5 million gay people. Right? At 23.6% of the same U.S. population, that would be 76.5 million gay people. I mean, that is a staggering difference, right? For there to be such a huge disparity, there has to be some kind of directed agenda at play here, right? People don't accidentally think 1 in 4 is gay when the number is closer to 1 in 24. I mean, just imagine what that would look like with a different minority group in that X spot. How the perceptions of that group would change. I mean, this is the product of the perception becoming reality. Why is sexual identity politics gaining so much ground today? Because the nation is convinced there are a hell of a lot more gay people than there actually are, right? Perception is reality. But who's benefiting from this? Well, sure, the 4.5% are, right? And they certainly know who their demographic is because women and young adults have the highest estimations of gay population, right? But this 4.5% is definitely benefiting disproportionately, right? And I want to take a moment here to stress that this is in no way an indictment of gay people or the LGBT, LMNOPQ movement, to each their own, I say, right? And this is just me trying to take an objective look at the information as it comes to me, right? I mean, I didn't seek this out. This came to me, right? And this could just as easily be the story of any minority concern gaining in public or popular opinion. Whether it's sexuality, as the case is here, or race, with the things happening within and around the BLM and the ALM movement, right? Or, as I said, the manipulation of the data around COVID and the pandemic. Not to mention Zionism, right? And some of the other organizations that are out there. This is all the same strategies here, right? Right, but in looking at who the beneficiaries are or what could be gained by this type of disproportionate perception, and one way that this information could be used is that this grossly inflated perception could be read as an attempt to normalize immorality by making it appear more prevalent than it is. Right? If we think there's more of it going on, then there must be, right? Perception is reality. So it could be seen as normalizing that behavior to those who don't believe that behavior is normal, like creating this friction, fomenting this sort of hate. That's a part of it too. But then there's also the financial benefit, right? Because Because in 2019, LGBT adults globally held a combined buying power of approximately $3.7 trillion. When I see a figure like that, I have to ask, who benefits? And who could benefit from this? Well, LGBT charities and activist organizations could benefit from this, right? And I'm not saying that this is what's happening, but it could be happening, right? I'm just looking for beneficiaries here because when I see figures in the hundreds of millions, in the billions, trillions of dollars like it is here, right? I start thinking of money laundering schemes, right? And ways to hide large sums of money. Hey, and that's what I think a lot of these programs really are in the end. Like BLM, like NASA, and some of these other programs, right? I mean, they're just giant money laundering schemes. So the big takeaway I have from this is somebody, somewhere, is benefiting financially, right? And they're using these same tactics across the board, no doubt about it. And they don't necessarily have to be gay, right? This could just be one giant trolling of the LGBT community, right? Because that is a lot of money. Because it's a cash cow, right? They use market saturation to achieve this. This is a business strategy. And what is business but war? And what is war but business? Right? And it's all psychological warfare. And so with that, just remember, guys, just because you don't know the truth doesn't mean you can't have fun with the lies, right? And so until the next one, cheers, guys.